A very good afternoon to our attendees who are here with us online today. My name is Jazzy and I will be your host for the day. A warm welcome to our Go International webinar series, and today's topic is on Indonesia digital economy, Industry 4.0 opportunities for Singapore tech companies. The Indonesian government has launched the Making Indonesia 4.0 program, which aims to propel the country into one of the top 10 global economies by 2030. Industry 4.0 has highlighted as one of the key initiatives to drive this transformation. All these create vast opportunities for our companies specializing in automation, industrial IoT, and system integration. Together with the strong economic relationship between Indonesia and Singapore, it paved the way for closer economic collaboration, bonding down for Singapore technology firms looking to venture into Indonesia. For today's program, we are honored to have speakers from EY and Industry Platform, where we will cover an analysis of Indonesia Industry 4.0 landscape and opportunities in the key enterprise project for Singapore tech companies. Before we start the event proper, allow us to share some functions of this webinar. The webinar slides will be uploaded to SGTech website after the session. We are also making a recording of this webinar, which will be available on our YouTube channel one day after the event. At any point of time, if you have any questions, you may use the Q&A function and help us indicate your name and company name when submitting them. We will answer to your questions during the combined Q&A segment after all the presentations have concluded. First up, we have our speakers from EY, Mr. Srinam Changali, Partner Value Creation Leader, ASEAN Strategy and Transformation at EY Solutions, and Mr. Anugrah Pratama, Director EY Parthenon at PT Ernst & Young Indonesia. Srinam is a partner at EY and leads the value creation and performance improvement practice for Southeast Asia. He helps companies across various sectors identify and implement sustainable improvement of operational, commercial, and financial metrics to drive cash to the bottom line. In addition, he guides executives to review top-line levers to enhance revenue and drive cost reduction programs in areas such as procurement, manufacturing, supply chain, finance, IT, and others. Srinam has in-depth experience working with organizations across retail, consumer goods, life sciences, and government sectors. And for Mr. Anugrah Pratama, he has more than 14 years of experience in consulting. He is deeply involved in many projects related to development of infrastructure in Indonesia. Formerly a secondary to World Economic Forum Geneva, Anugrah developed the ASEAN Future of Production, Industry 4.0 Readiness in ASEAN, and worked with clients to develop reform blueprints, roadmaps, and policy shaping. They will be sharing with us the analysis of Indonesia Industry 4.0 adoption and what is the state of Indonesia industrial economy and readiness for I 4.0. Now, let us welcome Srinam and Anugrah.
A very good afternoon to all of you. Thanks so much, Jazri. I'll just share my presentation in a second. I'm hoping you all can see the screen. So like Jazri pointed out, I think we'll cover a couple of things in the conversation today. We'll spend about 20-25 minutes or so covering the pages. We'll talk broadly about I 4.0 and the applicability in Indonesia. And we'll spend some time specifically on Indonesia and what sectors the Indonesian government is particularly looking at to drive the Industry 4.0 agenda. And within the sectors, maybe we can talk about a few use cases as well. I think we'll end this session by talking about some of the challenges for Industry 4.0 in Indonesia, as well as the opportunities that those challenges present. So if you look at if you look at the future of manufacturing, there are both external as well as internal drivers shaping the direction of manufacturing, right? Some of the external drivers include the macro uncertainty that all of us are seeing with the global trade tensions between the US and China, and that poses a bunch of uncertainty. We're seeing a lot of our clients focusing on localization of manufacturing and making their supply chains more resilient given that macro uncertainty. The second external driver is the changing consumer dynamics. Consumers are becoming more and more demanding. Specifically, they would like more customization of the product. So for certain sectors, at least, the long gone are the days of mass manufacturing and mass production. So customization is becoming extremely important. I think the third external factor is, of course, disruption through Industry 4.0, right? So those are the external. Internally as well, firms are now looking inwards to see what can they do better, how can they drive competitive advantage, be more cost effective, and so on and so forth. Right? So those internal drivers also play an important part in driving the future of manufacturing. If you then look at, okay, what is Industry 4.0? What are the building blocks? Of course, Industry 4.0 has been enabled by the higher computing power as well as the higher bandwidth for communication. Right? So those are the founding reasons why Industry 4.0 is now taking off. There are 6 building blocks in terms of technologies, right? AI, data analytics, 3D printing, advanced robotics, wearables, Internet of Things, and blockchain, right? So those are the 6 building blocks, if you may. And there are a bunch of different use cases that you see in the bottom here. And these are not exhaustive by any means. I think what is important is then within these use cases, trying to figure out in a particular industry, in a manufacturing setup, which are those use cases that are important, and how much time and impactful, and how much time would they take to implement. So just to give you a couple of examples, if you take machine flexibility enabled by robotics, for instance, going back to the point on customization, through a manufacturing line, the robotics enable us to make customizations on the fly for certain units as they pass through the production line. Take the example of predictive maintenance. Historically, you had either a time-based maintenance system or a condition-based maintenance system. With the advent of IoT and data analytics, you're now able to predict and do predictive maintenance versus doing it on a time-based or a condition-based basis, right? These are a couple of examples that have now come through, and we've seen our clients implement these use cases in their production lines. If you then take that and then look at a particular example, and this is for an electronics manufacturing value chain, it is important to remember that it is not just manufacturing, it is not just production. So when the Ministry of Industry and WEF looked at this, they're saying, let's look at the entire value chain, not just the manufacturing process itself, not just the production process itself, all the way from product development, procurement, and all the way to fulfillment. I think all those parts of the value chain are important to look at. And there are, of course, use cases that we'd seen earlier applicable across the entire value chain. If you then bring it to the context of Indonesia, the Ministry of Industry in Indonesia, worked with the World Economic Forum, has set out an aspiration for 2030. Right? They say that they want to be a global top 10 economy by 2030. They want to drive the contribution of manufacturing to GDP. Currently, it's between 18 to 20% of the total GDP in Indonesia is driven by manufacturing. They want to increase that to 25 to 30%. They want to see if they can get the productivity to cost ratios up by 2x. And they also want to drive local innovation R&D. So get a 2% share of spending to GDP for R&D. And those are the aspirations that the Ministry of Industry has set about. And then if you look on the right-hand side of this page, it tells you that Indonesia is very much in a nascent state. The framework that you see on the right-hand side is essentially the Industry 4.0 country readiness assessment that the WEF and Indonesia's Ministry of Industry put together. And in fact, my colleague Anugrah, who will now take over and walk you through the rest of the thinking, was actually part of that team that put that thinking together. So Anugrah, over to you.
Thank you, Sriram. Let me just briefly, if you can go back to the slide 7. It's very interesting, in terms of positioning of Indonesia in this particular framework. Back then, when I was still with the World Economic Forum, I was involved in assessing the ASEAN 6 ASEAN economies and put those ASEAN 6 into this particular framework. So I think the big homework for Indonesia is on both axes. So if you see the y-axis, we call it the drivers of a production, in which it's basically all the hygiene factors, the enablers in order to adopt the Industry 4.0. So in that particular axis, we have the demand factor, the adoption of technology and innovation, the institutional framework in the sense of regulatory framework that nurture the adoption of the Industry 4.0, capability of the human capital, the resources that they have, as well as the structure of the production. Structure of the production, which is the x-axis, is actually the complexity of the industry activity in that particular country. If you look at that one as well, the x-axis, meaning that in Indonesia, the activity of the industry is still quite simple compared to the others. Hence, still a lot of opportunities to improve Indonesia on both sides. So any Industry 4.0 play in Indonesia should be targeted to improve the Indonesia positioning, both in the drivers of production as well as the structure of production. Next slide, Sriram. Yeah, this is actually the aspirations. Yeah, so GDP growth rate. So the government of Indonesia really want to use and endorse Industry 4.0 as part of the growth engine for the economy. So basically the productivity of the economy. So from 5% of the economic growth to 6 to 7% GDP growth, so that they can be number 10 of economy in 2030. The other thing is, as much as possible, the government really wants that the Industry 4.0, sometimes it's quite controversial, because in some of the theoretical frameworks, some of the publication, we always mention, or we always read that Industry 4.0 will reduce the numbers of manpowers involved in the economy. But the perspective that being taken by Ministry of Industry of Indonesia, as well as the World Economic Forum at that time, because there are a lot of potential for Indonesia. So it's a homework for Indonesia to increase their productivity, increase their economic output using the Industry 4.0, so that still the economy can absorb the employment. They can absorb the people to work in Indonesia, in the industry. So the increasing of the economic output, that's the key. That's why in the previous slide, you can see that one of the other objective is actually to increase the net export. So by increasing the output of the economy, not only fulfilling the domestic demand of Indonesia, but also increasing the export volume out of Indonesia. The other aspirations is actually to increase the contribution of the manufacturing sectors from 20% to 25% by having this Making Indonesia 4.0. I need to put a disclaimer that Indonesia Making Indonesia 4.0 is actually very manufacturing driven. But as all of us are all aware that Industry 4.0 is not only limited to the manufacturing, as Sriram mentioned. So Industry 4.0 can also be applied to any services that are related to the economy of Indonesia. Okay, next slide, Sriram. In terms of sector to focus, so the government, at least the policymaker in Indonesia, are focusing on 5 sectors. As I mentioned before, the Making Indonesia 4.0 roadmap is actually driven by the Ministry of Industry Indonesia, and the Ministry of Industry domains is actually manufacturing. Hence, you will see all the 5 sectors that they focus on are all coming from the manufacturing. In terms of the logic of selections, those 5 sectors actually contribute to 72% of the manufacturing GDP. So 72% out of 20% of the economy, 61% of the export volume, and 77% of the absorption of the workforces. So there are 5 sectors that the government of Indonesia is going to focus until 2030. The first one is the food and beverage. The second one is a chemical, including the petrochemical, automotive and electronics, and textile. And what does it mean by this? Because they also have other industries. So the government of Indonesia will focus on these big industries, will develop a more detailed plan, will have what they call lighthouses. So they will pick 5 role model company in each of the focus sector to become a role model in applying the Industry 4.0 in Indonesia. For the other sectors, they kind of leave it to the industry itself in terms of the needs, the adoption, the collaboration. What they will do is actually to develop the regulatory framework to support, to act as an umbrella framework, the incentive and others for the other industries. Next. In terms of those 5 industries, I think in general, what I observe as a back then as a WF secondary for Indonesia is a lot of opportunities. Indonesia value chain in these 5 sectors are not solid enough in the sense of there are a lot of inefficiencies in each of the focus sectors, and a lot of opportunities for the Industry 4.0 technology, from artificial intelligence, 3D printing, augmented reality, virtual reality, advanced robotics, IoT, and even blockchain to be implemented in this. For example, in the food and beverage, in terms of a supply chain, Indonesia is a very big country. So it's a very challenging to manage the supply chain for the food and beverage, especially if you want to do some export, standardization of quality. So there are a lot of role that Industry 4.0 can play in this one. Chemicals, in terms of safety, in terms of continuous monitoring, product waste, as well as the supply chain visibility also. Automotive and electronics, even though by nature, these 2 industries are, we can say, one of the early adopters of the Industry 4.0, that's not the case in Indonesia, because most of the activities for these 2 sectors in Indonesia are only related to assembly of products. So not very sophisticated in a sense. So if they want to upgrade the activity in these 2 particular sectors, they really need to deploy Industry 4.0 technology. Textile was back then 10 years ago, was one of the leading sectors and still one of the leading sectors in Indonesia. But the main challenge that they are facing is actually some of the players are moving facilities, so not upgrading their facilities in Indonesia, but instead setting up a facility in, for example, other countries in ASEAN, for example, in Vietnam. So a lot of capital outflow in this particular sector. So it's a very focus of the government of Indonesia to revamp this particular textile industry so that they can be competitive in the future. Of course, it goes without saying the benefits in terms of increase in the productivity gain, increase in the labor costs, so productivity as well in all these sectors. Next slide, Sriram. Yeah. Making Indonesia 4.0 is actually the roadmap. And it's, in most cases, are driven by World Economic Forum kind of a framework. And World Economic Forum work at the national level, so not at the very specific industrial level. Now, what happened in Indonesia right now is the Ministry of Industry is starting to develop a more detailed kind of an assessment to assess the maturity. So So in the previous slide, we all see that the framework is assessing each of the country's maturity. Now Indonesia, they are doing assessment by industry, as well as an assessment in terms of readiness to implement the Industry 4.0 by company. They call it Indy 4.0. And if we see in terms of readiness and in terms of the impact, it's quite surprising that electronics and automotive, as I mentioned, because the activities are quite simple compared to the other countries. So in terms of readiness and impact, it's kind of low. But in terms of readiness and impact, food and beverage, textile, and chemical are actually things to be prioritized out of the 5. Some key challenges from policy point of view is actually first in Indonesia. I think Indonesia is a very big country, very broad, very large geography. So I think we need to really understand in terms of the readiness by industry and by clusters of companies or industry players, because the maturity is all different. SME, for example, are very lagging behind. Some of the medium company and even large company are also still lagging behind in terms of readiness to adopt this. But some are already an early adopter in this one. The second one, I think that the government is actually encouraging and put in place in some sectors now is what they call some incentive schemes and tax holiday. Tax holiday already been approved. Incentive scheme in terms of incentive for R&D, incentive in terms of vocational schools, yeah, and in terms of a tax, they call it super deductible. So if you set up R&D, if you set up a vocational school, you can multiply your R&D expense so that it will reduce your tax exposure. The third one, in terms of a challenge from public policy point of view, is this Industry 4.0 is highly driven by Ministry of Industry, which is a very manufacturing centric. In fact, Industry 4.0 can be applicable to any aspect of our life. Hence, the collaborations with other ministries are actually needed, collaboration among the stakeholders. Hence, I think organizing committees that coordinate every stakeholder are actually needed. And they just started what I mentioned before, Lighthouse Project. So 5 companies to represent each of the key sectors going forward as a role model. Next. Sriram, maybe you want to walk through in terms of ecosystem?
Sure, I can do that. Thanks, Panuga. So can you guys still hear me? Hear me okay? Yeah, cool. So as Anugrah mentioned, right, there's varying levels of maturity, both at the country level and as well as the industry level. Then if you get to a particular solution, right, at the solution level, what we've seen is it is hard for solution providers to provide a comprehensive set of solutions by themselves. So the key message on this place is that it requires an orchestration at the ecosystem level. So if you are getting a solution done at a particular company in a sector, you need to be able to have the right devices. You need to be able to then provide the right security layers on top of that. You need to then be able to provide the right analytics, and then also have all the system and solution providers come together, provide the system integrators as well. And on top of that, make sure that there's a business case for it all. Right. So I think what we're seeing is the solutions for Industry 4.0 are at the ecosystem level, and it needs to be done at that level for there to be maximum impact. I think the last thing we want to say is I think there's lots of opportunities in Indonesia, but there's also a lot of challenges. Anugrah mentioned the challenges on talent, infrastructure, as well as lack of local R&D. I think all of these challenges we see, and both at the industry level as well as the government policy level, solutions are being orchestrated and put in place. In terms of the audience in this particular conversation, I think that if you are looking to expand in Indonesia, there are some implications or things to keep in mind, I guess. The first is making sure that you identify the right sectors and the right companies to partner with. These companies need to have the right ambition and also have the right resources to drive the Industry 4.0 agenda. So that's the first. The second is, like we said earlier, you probably can't do it alone. So then you need to have that ecosystem of solution providers and advisors, and you need to have that right ecosystem in place, whether it be a local player, regional player, or global player. You need to have that ecosystem in place to provide the right solution. And then there has to be, of course, a co-created value proposition for your clients. Right? So those are some thoughts. I think we've covered the topics that we wanted to cover. Jezri, I'd like to hand it over to you to take the conversation forward.
Okay, thank you, Srinam and Aruda, for the insightful sharing. Just give me a minute. Okay. Next up, we have Mr. Felix Fernando, Head of Enterprise Engagement Indonesia at Industry Platform, where he will be sharing with us the opportunities for Singapore tech companies in the key enterprise projects in Indonesia. Based in Singapore, Felix works with international companies looking to assess the Southeast Asian markets within the ICT industry, and with a deep focus on Indonesia. He is primarily in charge of engaging enterprises across verticals on their digitalization transformation initiatives and assess new opportunities for technology providers. Felix, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Let me share my screen. Can you guys see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Jezri, for your kind introductions. And yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Hope everyone is in a good spirit, yeah, especially since the upcoming long weekend starting tomorrow. And Sriram and Pa Anugrah have shared a very comprehensive macro look of Indonesia. And through this presentation, I will go deeper into specific projects and opportunities to wrap up today's session. And hopefully this is useful for you who are interested to expand your business in Indonesia. So to start off, my name is Felix Fernando, as mentioned by Jezri. And in case you are wondering, I'm an Indonesian. Many people have asked me before whether I'm a Filipino because of my Fernando surname. Especially during our activities in Philippines, people would start talking to me in Tagalog, hearing my surname. But I can assure you that I'm 100% made in Indonesia. And yeah, so during this presentation, I'll be sharing nuggets of insights and some of our findings based on our discussions with the local enterprises in Indonesia. So you can take note of my email address, or you can add me on LinkedIn now and drop me a note anytime you have questions or interested to know more or get some of the data and insights from my presentation. So with this, I'll begin proper. So I will begin by sharing briefly what we Asia IoT Business Platform do. We have been in the region since 2012. And fun fact, exactly today, 30th of July, marks our 8th year of anniversary. And in Southeast Asia, we cover 6 countries, including Indonesia, Philippines, Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, and Myanmar too. We focus on enterprise digitalization projects. And in case you are confused about the IoT word in our name, Asia IoT Business Platform, IoT for us covers the whole suite of technology solutions. So when we talk about IoT, we define it in 3 broad categories. The first one would be sensors, second connectivity, and third would be the software or platforms, where solutions such as data analytics and cybersecurity would sit. And earlier, Sriram mentioned about the importance of ecosystem, and I agree with him. In our ecosystem, we engage 4 main stakeholders. The first one is government, second telcos, enterprises, and solution providers. Enterprise is the biggest and most important segment in our ecosystem. And when I say enterprises, I refer to the local enterprise end users. So companies like Astra, Sinarmas Group, Bank BRI, Bank BCA, and Bluebird would fall under this segment. And here you can see a snapshot of the local partners that we continuously engage to understand the development in Indonesia, what's happening on the ground. So you can see on the top left corner, Dr. Ismail is the Director General from Kominfo, the Ministry of ICT Indonesia. And you can see Telkom, and the rest are enterprises. And I'll go through some of the enterprises projects by this gentleman over here later on during the presentations. And before that, I will give you an overview of the current state of digital transformation in Indonesia. Every year, we run a survey and study involving over 1,500 individuals across Southeast Asia, and around 400 would be from Indonesia. That represents the local enterprises, including those I have mentioned before in the previous slide, to understand their state of mind on digitalization. An example of insights that we gather include what solutions enterprises in Indonesia are looking for. And for those of you who offer solutions which impart analytics capability as well as like platform to aggregate enterprises data in devices, I mean, based on the data, you have a good chance. You can see that over 60% are interested in unified platform, and about 80% of them are looking at data analytics and business intelligence. And for those of you offering standalone hardwares and devices, I mean, as Sriram has mentioned earlier, right? What I would suggest is to create a solution ecosystem before reaching out directly to these local Indonesian enterprises. And for our local partners, including telcos and governments, use these insights as well to further educate the local ecosystem. On the right side, you can see a report by One Tiknas. So One Tiknas is the Indonesian National ICT Committee. It is a cross-ministerial task force created by the president. This was last year's report created by them that utilized some of our findings as well. And if you're interested, I think it's like around 10 pages long report. If you're interested to see this report by One Tiknas, drop me a note and I can share it with you. And this slide shows you some of the pain points of the Indonesian enterprises. From the chart on the left, top left, we can see that in general, enterprises in Indonesia is still at the nascent stage of the development. Most of them are still in the planning, POC, and early stage of implementation. And their priorities can be seen in the chart below it. Not understanding the market and target accounts well is a common mistake that we have observed when Singapore tech companies try to do business in Indonesia. They don't fully understand the local business culture. They don't know what the local enterprises are thinking and expecting. And we believe that, in order for you to do a successful market development in the enterprise B2B space, you have to understand these fundamental insights first. One example of it, when pitching your solutions to the local enterprises in Indonesia, you have to know what are they thinking. On the right side, the infographic, you can see the top objective of the Indonesian enterprises when they explore solutions. So based on this, instead of keep harping on creating new revenue streams when you pitch your products, for example, to them, you should instead focus on improving productivity and cost reductions. Why? Because as you can see, majority of them, 75% of them are interested to implement solutions to improve their productivity. Maybe for them, they are not at the stage where they care a lot more for new revenue streams because there are still a lot of cost savings that they can target by implementing solutions. And it is also important to look at their expectation too. You can see that the majority of them are expecting to see result within a year. So when they invest in technology, they expect a tangible ROI within a year. And what it means for you is that you should relook at your solutions and value propositions and see if it fits the market. And this helps you to decide how much effort you need to put in, for example, like educating the local enterprises. And the next question, after knowing all of these insights about what the Indonesian enterprises are thinking, the next question would be, how do I enter into Indonesia? What is the best go-to-market strategy for Singapore tech companies who are interested? Based on our experience, local enterprises still prefer to conduct business with their existing SI partners. Big enterprises like PLN, for example, they will engage their SI, Icon Plus, for most of their digital projects like smart metering, for example. So you have to go through these partners in a way when doing a project for PLN. And similarly, for companies like Kimia Pharma, is a pharmaceutical company in Indonesia, they engage Telkom as their SI, and Telkom acts as a gatekeeper for them too. And it is important to understand this value chain on how they do business when you want to enter the market. And based on the fact that I just shared, it's obvious that one way to do your business is through partnership with the local SI in Indonesia. However, it is not that simple. Not a lot of local SIs have the capability of selling solutions and educating the enterprise end users. Traditionally, these local SI, they were just selling products like routers, servers, and racks. So an alternative approach that could be more effective is to engage the enterprise end users directly. Speak with them directly to understand their plans and their pain points. And in this way, you also establish a direct relationship with them. We can see from the chart that even though 56% of the enterprises engage the local SI, 43% of them are also very open to work with international solution providers. So when you speak to them and you manage to convince that you can help them with their digital transformation strategy or pain points, if they're interested, a lot of times they will connect you with their SI and ask their SI to integrate your solutions. And this model, we can see also how bigger companies are adopting this approach. Companies like Microsoft and Dell, for example, make a point to engage the enterprise end users directly too, even though they have a partners network. And this, I think, has worked well for them. And by the way, before I forget, all of this data and infographic, including the ones in the previous slides as well, are compiled as a report by my team. So if you are interested to get this infographic and data, drop me a note on LinkedIn or email if you want a copy. Yeah, and for the last segment of the presentation, I'll be sharing some of the projects by the enterprise end users in Indonesia. In general, in our view, there are three big segments in Indonesia that you can target. The first one would be the Industry 4.0 ecosystem, which include, of course, manufacturing and the ecosystem around it, like transport and logistics. Second one would be the smart city. And last one would be the retail and finance verticals when we talk about digital economy opportunities in Indonesia. And as shared by EY, Industry 4.0 is a major initiative in Indonesia. And EY, Pak Anugrah and Sriram just now have gone through the framework in details. So yeah, I will just briefly go through it. And for this Industry 4.0 initiative, IoT is a big segment of it. Aside from Ministry of Industry, Kominfo also play a part in this initiative. In 2018, for example, Kominfo launched a draft of the IoT regulation to support the Making Indonesia 4.0 initiative. And it was launched during our activities in Indonesia, and Kominfo people tried to gather feedback from the local stakeholders as well. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with the pictures at the bottom left. I see some of the familiar names when I joined this webinar just now. And yeah, as you can see, Agitech was leading a delegation from Singapore and showcased their solutions to Kominfo in 2018 and 2019. And I believe in the picture with Dr. Ismail was add value. And for our friends who have joined us there and haven't received the photos, feel free to ping us and I can share with you the album. If I remember correctly, there were about 8 to 10 companies under this delegation led by Agitech to Indonesia. And this was a session where Ministry of Industry shares the updates on the Industry 4.0 framework alongside Kominfo, Indosat Ooredoo, and Kimia Pharma. And these are some of the examples of enterprises inside the Industry 4.0 ecosystem and their projects. For Pertamina and Kimia Pharma, Our CEO has covered the projects during the previous webinar session with SUTech. I have included the link, so when you get this slide, you can click on the link to watch it in detail. And for now, I will jump right into Indocement, the third enterprises. Indocement is one of the Indonesian's largest cement manufacturers. And for Industry 4.0, their main aim is to integrate their operation and manufacturing floor seamlessly. They want to have a real-time insights on the health and status of their equipments, their operational data, and they also want to have emergency alerts for their facilities across cities in Indonesia. And this would be relevant for you who have solutions such as platforms or analytic software solutions that can be integrated to their MES and PLCs. Workforce management solutions and asset tracking could be relevant as well, as they have many resources to manage. They have a lot of assets and their facilities spread across Indonesia. And after Indocement, Cikarang Dry Port is another enterprise that we engage very closely. Cikarang Dry Port has a vision to be the leading smart port in Indonesia. And they have done a lot of digitalization initiatives since 2016, 2017. Their initiatives include port automation system, e-seal for the containers, and fleet and route management system. So what they do is they do real-time tracking for all the goods and containers handled by them. And all of these containers can only be accessed or opened in a certain location through the e-seal technology and geofencing solutions. And actually, a Singapore company is involved in one of the segment of the projects, these digitalization projects by Cikarang Dry Port. As you can see in the picture, we brought a delegation of international solution providers to visit Cikarang Dry Port's facilities to discuss potential collaboration. And the next project that Cikarang Dry Port is looking at is a surveillance and monitoring system that can be applied in their facilities. This include solutions such as image and video analytics solutions. And talking about this surveillance video analytics solutions, I think this ties in nicely with the next segment that I'm going to talk about, which is the smart city segment in Indonesia. Indonesia has been big on smart city initiatives since few years ago. We have seen a lot of projects going on since then, not only in the public sectors or cities, but also in the private sectors. But I think since my time is very limited, I will just go through the ones in public sectors. So one example would be Jakarta. Jakarta is a pioneer project in Indonesia. They started the smart city projects in 2015, and the first few projects include a command center called Jakarta Smart City Launch. This photo was taken during our visit to the command centers in 2016. And aside from the command centers, they also implemented an application that can be used by the citizen to report problems ranging from crimes, potholes, garbage to floods problems in 2016. And another fun fact, a year after that, in 2017, Singapore government launched a similar application solution to called One Service. But I'm not sure how many of you have downloaded the application or have heard about the application. So what's next for Jakarta? The city is currently focusing on creating an integrated transportation and payment system, similar as the one we have here in Singapore, where you can travel and pay seamlessly, right, through using the buses and MRT. So the objective is to improve the urban mobility and keeping it affordable. And this is also based on our discussion with the MRT Jakarta and Transjakarta 2 last year in Indonesia. And aside from tier 1 cities like Jakarta, we have seen projects done by smaller cities too. From the map, you can see the circle in the bottom part, showing cities like in East Java and Bali region, Banyuwangi and then Pasar City. They have embarked on smart city projects too, but they have different definition of smart city from Jakarta, for example. Banyuwangi, their main focus is more towards digital government, where they want to create an integrated and transparent system at all levels of the bureaucracy so that the citizen can can see what the government is doing at the moment. And this is very similar concept as what Surabaya does for their smart city projects. For Bali and Denpasar, there are two main focus. The first one would be the disaster management system, where they explore projects to monitor the volcano there in Bali, Mount Agung. And they also want to explore the tsunami warning system. And the other focus would be the tax collection system improvement to increase the revenue and to prevent fraud in Bali. And for these smart city projects, telcos are very active as well. They usually act as a consultants or as a aggregators of the solutions to the cities. Banyuwangi, for example, Indosat is heavily involved in there, whereas Telkom is responsible for the projects in Bali. And its subsidiary, joint venture between Telkom and Singtel, Telkomsel, they are very active in Makassar smart city projects. So from here, you can see that engaging telcos is a way to start your business in Indonesia too. They are very, very aggressive in looking for solution partners that can complement their current capabilities. As you can see in the pictures, they hosted sessions in their centers and office to explore collaborations with the international vendors too. And last but not least, another key growth areas would be the retail and finance verticals. Look at the infographic on the right. Look, the growth over the past few years and the projected growth. It has a CAGR of around 60% for the past years, and it will still continue. And the government of Indonesia has realized this too and has launched several initiatives and framework to support it. This includes the National Payment Gateway Initiative and e-commerce roadmap. And this initiative not only impact the retail companies, but also banks and financial institutions, since they have to facilitate and keep up with this boom of digital transactions. And these are some of the projects by the local enterprises. You see Pertamina and Kimia Pharma again in this slide. And I think, as mentioned by Sriram, I believe earlier, when they do digital transformation, it is across the value chain, not only in the operation or manufacturing or production side, but they also do it until the end, which is the retail side. So Pertamina, for example, has around 5,500 gas stations across Indonesia. And for Kimia Pharma owns more than 10,000 pharmacy and retail stores and a few hundred clinics. And for this retail segment, they have explored a number of projects, digitalization projects too, including like e-stores and customer analytics. And this is also an opportunity for companies in Singapore who offer solutions, automated operation solutions, such as chatbot, RPA, and e-documents as well. And after those two, Bluebird is another good example of enterprises who are very progressive. Their business was badly disrupted by the ride-hailing companies like Uber, Gojek, and Grab back then. And since then, they have seen that they have to digitalize their business. They have to change their mindset as a necessity to survive. It's not a good to have mentality anymore, but they have to adopt technology to compete with the likes of Gojek and Grab at the moment. And Bank BRI also has a very comprehensive plan for digitalizations. Bank BRI is the largest listed state-owned bank in Indonesia, and they have also implemented a lot of solutions from big data analytics, RPA, chatbot, eKYC, and even like asset management system that is powered by their own satellites in Indonesia. And the current executive VP Pak Kaspar was working in Silicon Valley before Bank BRI convinced him to go back to Indonesia and spearhead the digitalization projects. This shows how serious Bank BRI with digitalizations. And you can see that Bank BRI, they won Enterprise Innovation Award in 2018. And as you can see, the one on the left, the gentleman on the left with the blue batik is Pak Kaspar receiving the award. And last year in 2019, they won the overall ASEAN Enterprise Innovation Award. And yeah, I think I'm running out of time. So to conclude, these are some of the solutions that we feel could be relevant to the Indonesian enterprises. So we segment it in a different verticals like manufacturing, smart city, and retail finance. But as you can see from the solutions, there are some solutions that can overlap, that can serve different verticals as well, such as like managed services, cybersecurity, platforms as well. And let us know if you want to check how your company or your solutions can fit into the ecosystem in Indonesia. We have worked closely with SG Tech to assist Singapore companies to venture overseas. And if you are interested, there are a lot of grants and subsidies by the government that you can tap into for your overseas business development. And this subsidy and grant can cover up to 70% of the cost. You can drop me a message or email, and I'll be happy to share the details. And last statement to conclude, the one key takeaway that I hope you get through this session is that I believe it is very important for B2B companies to understand the target market well, from the culture, the state of mind, the target accounts, be it the target enterprises or partners, SI partners, channel partners, and their decision-making process. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me, and happy to have discussion with you. Thank you very much.
Yep. Thank you so much, Felix. So now we will actually open up for the Q&A segment. So attendees, if you have any questions, you may use the Zoom Q&A function that you see at the below panel of your screen, right? To submit in your questions, right? So I think we have a few questions coming in already. Let me do them out. Okay, we have a question from Vincent. So he mentioned that, Industry 4.0 is a very sexy theme. So how, how the Indonesian businesses are being convinced, right, to adopt all these technologies, and if this is also being swayed by the, the COVID-19 pandemic. So perhaps Shrina Anuga would like to take this question.
Panu, go for it.
Thank you. Yeah, as explained, that actually in terms of competitiveness, Indonesia, even if we compare to the other ASEAN economy, for example, Vietnam and Thailand, they need to be worried. So in terms of productivity. So let me give you a context. So minimum wage in Indonesia is always increasing at on average 8% every year, while the productivity of the people are still flattening. Meanwhile, if we use the same metrics and compare it with the Vietnam, a totally different outlook. So they can manage the cost of a labor, but the productivity somehow increasing. So already on that particular aspect is another problem to be solved. And we can always see how Industry 4.0 can help in this one. The other thing is inefficiency in the industry. So for example, if you take a look at the overall from upstream, midstream to downstream of the industry, pick any industry, you can easily find inefficiency in Indonesia. That's not to mention the inherent complexity of the country itself. So in terms of a massive geography, yeah, multiple handling, high cost of doing business, for example, in the logistic and so on and so forth, that they need to solve. So in terms of convincing them that they need Industry 4.0 as one way to improve the situation, it's very easy in a sense, especially a large-scale company who are competing with the foreign companies. Yeah. So for example, from the economic statistic, we see that in terms of a net export, Indonesia is now decreasing in terms of a net export, only 0.8% of a net export, meaning that more and more import product are coming. So they're not competitive in the sense against the foreign players. So there is actually a need on that one. Whether it is swayed by COVID or not, it's even more important due to the COVID, because they need to save costs, they need to still operate in a way. they need to be even more efficient during this particular area. Maybe I think Sriram can add on it, or Felix can add on it, in terms of whether they are willing to pay at what price and how far they can go in terms of adopting this effort in terms of a change management, because you need to educate the people and others. Another problem that I think need to be faced after having that kind of a conversation. Sriram, any other view?
No, I think you've covered most of the important points, Panug. I think in terms of whether this has been swayed by the COVID-19 pandemic, I think if anything, it's maybe accelerated the process for some of the sectors, right? And there are some sectors that have been significantly impacted by the current pandemic, and those sectors have maybe taken a more proactive view of driving the Industry 4.0 agenda. But other than that, I don't think there's anything you've missed, Panug. Felix, you want to add anything to what we mentioned?
Yeah, actually, I share the exact sentiment because, in fact, earlier this week, I just spoke with a number of manufacturing companies in Indonesia, including a Kimia Pharma, right? When they mentioned about Industry 4.0 initiative, they mentioned that they are not scrapping it. They have realized that there are good ROI that they can get, right? But it's just because of COVID, they are putting it on hold and they are revising the plan. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you, speakers. Yeah, in fact, I think you hear this a lot of time, right? Because COVID is like the disruptor, to help. I mean, right now, disruptor to digitalization. All companies have to digitalize right now, regardless, right? So, okay. Next, okay, I also wanted to ask that, maybe for EY side, early on you all share like, the analysis of the Indonesia Industry 4.0 landscape, right? So what are some of the, the latest developments that you see in the current Indonesia I 4.0 scene right now? Maybe Srinam or Anuga?
Yeah, I think in terms of the latest development from government point of view, because my focus was on the public policy. So the endorsement of this Making Indonesia 4.0, the appointment of 5 lighthouses, they call it lighthouses, the role model. The recently approved the tax holiday. So you can get 20 years of tax holiday if you are investing in this particular digital sectors, new technologies sectors. And then what we call super deductible. So like I mentioned, multiplied your R&D or vocational expenses in related to Industry 4.0 up to 300%, so that you can get reduction in terms of tax to the government. Others, I think, in private sectors, as Felix mentioned, a lot of examples that private sectors are actually engaging into this particular initiative. Governments are actually gung-hoing. Ministry of Communication and Information, I was also involved in developing their 5 years strategic plan, which was released this January. One of the 2 new pillars in the Ministry of Communication and Information roadmap is actually the new digital economy pillars and e-government, smart government, which covers smart cities, smart citizens, and others. So yeah, I think going forward, both private and government institutions are gung-ho on this particular initiative.
Okay, thank you, Srinam. Okay, we have a question for industry platform. So from John, right? So Felix, earlier on you actually share, some of the government smart city projects in Indonesia. So are there any also, private-led smart city projects in Indonesia? What are the key differences in the project between the government or the private sector?
Yeah, actually, we have seen a lot of private sectors pursuing smart city projects as well. So conglomerate group and real estate developers like Sinarmas Land, for example, they have implemented smart city solutions in their estates in they call it BSD. Yeah, BSD state is 2 hours drive from Jakarta, Panugra, if I'm correct. Yeah, around 1 to 2 hours drive from Jakarta. So they have, in these estates, they have implemented like command centers as well. They have launched an app for their residents as well to file complaints. And aside from that, they also have implemented solutions such as the asset management solutions for their garbage trucks, as well as the internal bus shuttle. And in terms of the difference between the private and public sectors, I think in terms of business, if you look at the sales cycle, private would be faster because it is less complex to deal with private projects rather than governments, because for government projects, you have to go through more layers of bureaucracy.
All right. Okay. Now we have the next question from Yanken. So he is asking, like, what are the basic infrastructure available in Indonesia, to serve the I 4.0 settlement? Srinam, anything that you can comment?
I think Panduk, you might want to take that question, right? Because it's specific about infrastructure in Indonesia. I can add on to that after.
I think all the Industry 4.0 will requires internet, the basic connectivity. Hence, I think during the discussion with the Ministry of Communication and Information, we see in some of the more advanced country, they downgrade actually the network and connectivity as one pillar to be horizontal, to become a kind of a foundation for all this new economy. But in Ministry of Communication and Information, that kind of a connectivity is still treated as one particular pillar. So it's still a big homework in terms of internet connectivity. Indonesia is a very big country, a lot of remote areas. How can you encourage, for example, small, medium enterprise and migrate them into e-commerce if they don't have a sufficient and reliable connectivity? The second one is actually cybersecurity. Both from the infrastructure and technology point of view, as well as the people mindset, people mindset. So a lot of literacy will be needed. I think if they can solve that particular problem, then many solutions can be implemented right away. So basic homework for Indonesian government is actually to provide this connectivity at a reliable standard, as well as cheap in the cheap and reasonable price. Felix, maybe you want to add, or Sriram?
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree with Panugra as well. And yeah, I think even the government, they have realized that they have this big homework, right? That's why under the Ministry of ICT, they have done a lot of initiative how to improve the connectivity options as well. And for the cybersecurity as well, I think in 2018, Indonesia, President Jokowi created this body called BSSN as well, the one task force responsible to come up with the cybersecurity framework for the enterprises and government as well.
Yeah, but I think one of the key things already mentioned by both Felix and Anugrah is connectivity, and I think 5G is maybe a couple of years away. Probably 2022 is when we expect to see 5G going live in Indonesia, 5G services, right? So with that, I think that will help. Although the coverage of the 5G network is a big question mark, what kind of coverage we'll see in remote parts of Indonesia we just have to wait and see. But I think that
on that one, I think because again, it's very big. Indonesia is a very big country. So what will happen is actually what they call RNR, relocation and redeployment. So for example, now all the state-of-the-art network connectivity, 4G and others are deployed in Java and Jakarta. So once that 5G is coming, so they will relocate and redeploy the infrastructure to the remote area, which is in the eastern part of Indonesia. So if as Rira mentioned, maybe 2-3 years down the road, 5G will come to Indonesia, but not all Indonesia, because they will redeploy the 4G infrastructure to the places that are currently still in the 2G or 3G.
Okay, thank you. So I think we have also a few attendees here. They are from the EdTech industry. So whether Anugang or Felix, right, can you all share whether there are also opportunities for educational technology Singapore firms, right, in the Indonesian market.
Maybe
Like
Felix?
whether, yeah, correct. Any
yeah,
like
I
of
think,
the university there, you know, are also, you know, I believe right now because with also COVID, right, a lot of schools or maybe, you know, I'm not too sure
yeah.
about whether they are home-based learning like Singapore. Yeah. So I mean, particularly in the educational scene, are there any, you know, key opportunities that you feel that there are, you know, for Singapore companies?
I think at least from our perspective, I think the market for edtech in Indonesia is still very, very nascent. Especially, you know, during the COVID, the Indonesian government was still struggling on how to come up with a home-based learning, because as Pak Anugrah mentioned, Indonesia is very, very huge and very diverse. And especially they want to push like e-learnings and to improve the capability of the human workforce as well. But there was a big hoo-ha, right, Pak Anugrah, because of Ruang Guru as well. So I'm not so sure, but maybe Pak Anugrah can enlighten us as well.
Yeah, I think in terms of education, edutech, as Felix mentioned, some of the names, some of the edutech companies are actually collaborating with the government. Because, for example, due to this COVID, government will have the kind of a subsidy, and some part of the subsidy is actually remote education, or yeah. So yeah, and I also see, for example, in Ministry of Communication and Information roadmap, in order to upgrade all these small medium enterprise to get to use the e-commerce, understand the data security, cyber security, and others. I think it can be also it can be done as well during the using the remote education. So there are a lot of opportunities in this particular.
Just one other thing, just to keep in mind, right? If you look, take a step back and look at edtech across the globe, right? There are very few edtech players who've scaled across countries, right? You pick Indonesia, for example, you have Ruang Guru. You pick India, you have Byju's, right? So it seems to be a localized phenomenon. So you do need to understand the local needs. You need to understand the education system in the particular country. And so if there is a startup edtech player here in Singapore, and you're trying to create a platform in Indonesia, you just need to keep in mind that, you know, whether you ask yourself whether you really understand the local needs and the local systems, right? So it's something to keep in mind, I guess.
Okay, thank you. And there's another question from Roberto. So he was asking, I think early on, Anugrah, you also mentioned about the 5G network. So what is the current, you know, the roadmap in Indonesia on the 5G network, and how can it can be like a strong alternate backbone, right, for this industrial 4.0?
Yeah, I think people from Ministry of Communication and Information is the right one to answer this. But the big homework for Indonesia from public policy point of view is actually frequency spectrum. So one of the key challenges to implement 5G in Indonesia is actually reframing of the spectrum. So and it has a long history back then. So they need to rearrange the spectrum first, release some of the spectrum, move some of the existing players, then they have the capacity to run the 5G, and that process is actually will be done this year and the next year. Hence, in terms of roadmap, the earliest we can see 5G is in another two years from now.
Okay, good. Okay, we have, okay, there's a question from Paru. So Paru, okay, with regards to the next step to collaborate with partners and SI in Indonesia, actually because SGTech, we do have different programs to help our members also to expand into Indonesia. So this one we can take it offline, and then we can also link you out with our partners from industry platform to discuss further. Yeah. And okay, another question from John is that, you know, how mature are the tech companies in Indonesia? You know, that there seems to be like a stagnant growth in a number of unicorns. And also, will you be able to also comment like which area of tech industry, right, that SG companies can target to? Perhaps Anugrah and Felix can help to answer this.
Maybe Felix, yeah, with your experience dealing with them.
Yeah, so for that questions, how mature is the tech companies in Indonesia? in terms of unicorns, yeah, maybe because they are, but these tech companies are mostly B2C. Yeah? But when we play into B2B space, I think there are a lot of companies who are growing, but it's just that it doesn't get picked up by the media. So actually, we have see companies like Clue, for example, or NoteFlux, these local startups who offers B2B services to the enterprises in Indonesia. And sorry, Jasri, for the second question.
You know, any, let me just read again. So any comments on which area of the tech industry that Singapore companies can target to? I think earlier on you mentioned some of the area, right?
Yeah, I think I can share the slides with you guys later, but as mentioned earlier, I think there are three big main segments that the Singapore companies, of course, it depends on your solutions, but one is, of course, the Industry 4.0 and the verticals inside the ecosystems like manufacturing, supply chain or logistics. Second would be the smart city, is either government projects or the projects driven by the private real estate company. And last one would be the retail and finance company. Retail can be like, you know, the Matahari Mall in Indonesia, Lion Superindo, or even like the e-commerce that we have all heard for the past few years, like, you know, Tokopedia, Bukalapak as well.
Okay, yeah. And okay, perhaps this question Anuka can help to answer. I think because they want to understand better on how the Indonesia, you know, the manufacturers in Indonesia, in terms of, you know, if let's say there's this annual subscription license plan, right, structure for software solution, because some of the customers, right, they will prefer to purchase like an upfront one-time perpetual license, and instead of, you know, buying a piece of equipment upfront without any recurring costs. I mean, with your assistant that, you know, in Indonesia, your knowledge, or perhaps Streamline, you know, can you all help to advise on this?
I think that will be Felix, yeah, on the subscription and others.
No, I mean, like it based on the Indonesian manufacturer. How comfortable are they? You know? Is there any comments?
Sorry, could you repeat the question again?
So, you know, like the I 4.0 solutions, right? So they are also, you know, manufactured in Indonesia. Would they be, you know, do you know, like from those enterprise users that you work with, are they comfortable with like the kind of annual kind of subscription plan, or sometimes, you know, they prefer to like purchase upfront, right? Like a license, you know, a one-time license.
I think there have been like an increasing number of enterprises who are more comfortable, because traditionally it's always capex, yeah. So they have to pay upfront for all the projects. But we have seen a number of enterprises are comfortable with the software as a service, meaning the subscription model, like they need to pay yearly as well. So
yeah, but maybe I can also add something here, right, Jerry? So we of course work with a number of clients across different sectors. So I can give you two examples. One is a subsidiary of Astra. I won't tell you which one. And the other is one of Sinalmas's businesses, right? And both these businesses are very brick and mortar type businesses. And the way they went about Industry 4.0 was they figured out a strategy first. So they hired advisors to begin with, after which they figured out a roadmap for the next 3 years, what needs to happen. And then they did a mix of a couple of things. One, figured out and built solutions in-house, built it by themselves with some help. But then they basically had almost zero subscription or zero capex, right? Because it's essentially labor cost and some, of course, some advisor cost, right? But then they had no subscription. For some solutions where they were not able to do it in-house, they basically got a third-party solution, plugged that in. And typically we've seen most of these are, like Felix mentioned, on a subscription basis. I can't think of any example in the last few years where clients have been, spending large amount of capex upfront. So we do see a lot of trend towards building the solutions themselves if they can, or then they have a subscription model on a yearly basis for certain solutions.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So we have another question from Richie. So he's asking, you know, how is the sentiment of the Indonesian government, right, towards enhancement of technology towards the government infrastructure assessment, such as like, you know, road transport infrastructure, you know, the highways, all those using AI. So maybe Felix, based on your experience with the government right now, on all these smart cities project, do you all hear anything, the sentiment from them using more AI or IoT solutions? Felix? Can you hear me? Felix, you are muted.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I couldn't hear anything just now.
Okay. You got my questions?
No, sorry, I didn't hear it at all.
Okay, no, so this question is from Ruchi, right? So because earlier on you also share on some of the smart city projects by the government. So he wanted to know, how is the sentiment of the Indonesian government, right, towards enhancing technology on the government infrastructure assessment, such as the transport infrastructure using AI or IoT.
Yeah, I think they have explored that space as well, especially for the tier 1 cities, as I mentioned, right? Like Bandung and Jakarta, they have implemented like AI to understand the traffic as well, and they use and I think this is going to be replicated to other cities, but of course, the problem with Indonesia is different cities will have different pain points, so their definition of smart city would differ. So it is important to zoom in specific cities and their projects.
Let me see any other question. Because in view of time, we'll probably take the last questions. Okay, from Peter, how can cybersecurity companies take advantage of the industry 4.0? Any opportunities out there for Singapore companies in the cybersecurity space? Felix or Anugrah?
Yeah, I think as shared by Panugra earlier as well, right? And when we discussed about cybersecurity, it has come into the attention to the government and enterprises that when they want to pursue digitalization, cybersecurity is one aspect. And it was reflected in our study as well. The top 3 deterrents for the local enterprises in Indonesia to adopt or to pursue digitalization is actually security aspect as well. But as mentioned, the government has come up with this task force called the BSSN, and they have started educating the enterprises. And I think earlier of this year, we speak with the Astra Group as well, and one of the subsidiary was attacked by, they were hit by cyber attacks as well. So I think this is a good opportunity for Singapore enterprises to go to Indonesia to explore, to speak with them, and maybe solve their pain points.
All right. Okay. So I think we are running out of time already. For those that we are not able to answer live, we will be able to get back to you at the end after this session. But before we close off, I just want to ask the speakers any last advice for Singapore companies thinking of entering into Indonesia market. So maybe Shrina, you can start first.
Yeah, sure. No, first of all, thank you all for taking the time, and I hope this was an engaging conversation. I mean, look, there's no advice as such. I think all we can say is Indonesia is a huge market, lots of potential, and like we said, they have some challenges specifically for those who want to go in and find and sell solutions in Indonesia. I think one is making sure that you have the right partners, and I think Felix also mentioned that it's best to have some kind of partnership with. If you're going after large enterprises, especially have a partnership with the system integrators. So I think that I think makes a lot of sense, having the right local partners. Then second, making sure you pick the right sectors and companies to go after, right? And making sure that they have the right aspirations, and I think that becomes important. And the third is making sure there's a clear value proposition as to not just the end customer and then the end client, but also to your local partners in Indonesia. What is it that you're bringing to the table? I think these are the 2-3 things probably you want to keep in mind as you go to market in Indonesia.
Sure. Moving on to Anuga, any last advice?
Yeah. I echo Sriram. I think for me, my advice is I would rather go in terms of focus on one industry, but solving the inefficiency in the entire value chain from their customer, the midstream, upstream, rather than going only partial. So, for example, for IoT solution. You can do that for the entire value chain. Only by doing that, I think you can bring value, a good improvement to the overall efficiency of the industry. Yeah.
Okay. Felix?
For
Last
me,
advice. Yeah.
advice is like, as mentioned, I have mentioned so many times during my presentations. First thing would be you have to know the industry very well. You have to zoom in which accounts you want to target and whether your value proposition or solutions would fit to them. And secondly would be, when you go into market, always remember this approach when, you have to understand how their business works. So you should speak directly with them and you should speak with their partners as well to establish the ecosystem model in Indonesia.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, once again, thank you very much to Shinam Anuga from EY as well as Felix from Industry Platform for the very insightful sharing, and as well as all the attendees for the questions. So let me just, before we end this, I would like to just share with you some of the upcoming activities that we have also. So we have the upcoming Go International Webinar series in August that is focusing on Philippines and Vietnam. So if you are interested to attend, you may scan the QR code on visit HGTech website to register for these upcoming events. And we would also like to get our attendees to help us complete, this short post-webinar survey so that we can actually create relevant content and improve also for our future sessions. Just for information, this survey is different from the internationalization survey that we shared in the early start of the session. Okay, so you can actually scan the QR code here or enter the link in the screen to access to the form. Once again, thank you everyone for attending today. We hope you have gained valuable takeaways from this session, and we hope to see you again soon in our next session. Thank you. Take care and stay safe. Thank you, speakers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Yasri.